All right, today we're very excited to share with you the Energy Innovation Project, an online resource designed to help public and private sector stakeholders better understand the current state of federally funded American energy innovation, from technology invention, translation, adoption, and diffusion. The Energy Innovation Project aggregates data from federal sources to understand where funding is flowing, how projects are deploying and how quickly they're deploying, and what are the lessons learned so we can continue to modernize American energy innovation. Currently, this effort is focused on the U.S. Department of Energy and a small subset of offices we consider to be part of the science and energy innovation ecosystem, but we plan to expand to include other relevant agencies soon. The Energy Innovation Project provides data currently dating back to 2017 to help answer questions like, how much funding does DOE have for nuclear energy? How quickly is that funding being spent? How is it being awarded? And how quickly are these projects being built? And what can we learn from each project to accelerate more innovation moving forward? We're not recommending policy or advocating for our favorite technologies, projects, or funding recipients. We're gathering data and showcasing analysis of the current state of federally funded U.S. energy innovation in ways that are tech neutral and support all markets. We are tracking major trends, things like how Congress continues to fund DOE to do more work in later stage technology demonstration and deployment, how only a fraction of the $60 billion of bipartisan infrastructure law funding has been spent since it was appropriated in 2011, and the fact that most of these funds remain at DOE for additional energy innovation. We describe the impact of the loss of roughly 20% of DOE's workforce last year on America's energy innovation agenda. How much funding does DOE have to spend compared to the number of employees DOE has to spend it? Countries like China are outpacing the United States in many aspects of energy innovation, from manufacturing to supply chains and key export markets. What's clear is their ability to rapidly scale creates virtuous feedback that is not resonating loudly enough in the United States. The Energy Innovation Project was created to help policymakers, innovators and researchers, and investors by providing transparent data and unbiased analysis and recommendations for new approaches for accelerating breakthroughs. Stick around until the end and we'll show you more about the Energy Innovation Project and its capabilities. But first, we're going to begin today's launch event by setting the context of America's energy innovation system today and what we see as the priorities for tomorrow, with a discussion among three leaders with highly distinguished careers in energy, policy, and investment. First, Ann Simpson is the vice chair of the Official Monetary Financial Institutions Forum and former managing investment director at CalPERS. Ann will help us navigate energy innovation opportunities and challenges from a large investment fund perspective. Tom Fanning is the chairman of the executive committee for the Alliance of Critical Infrastructure and the former CEO of Southern Company. During his long and accomplished career, Tom has held executive roles across a variety of business disciplines, including finance, strategy, international business development, and technology. Last but not least, Ernest Moniz is the founder and CEO of the EFI Foundation and the former U.S. Secretary of Energy, where he directed many efforts to advance innovation in energy, basic science, and nuclear security, and has been a chief architect of many policy initiatives aimed at accelerating U.S. and international innovation activities. I welcome the panel, and let's begin. With Ernie, I'm going to start with you, and if we could start at the beginning. You've thought a lot about energy innovation, how it works, and how to do it better. How would you describe the current state of America's energy innovation and any relevant trends you're tracking? You're muted, Ernie.
Unmute. Okay, let's try it again. So let me start by thanking you, Alex, and the team for moving forward with this innovation initiative, and also our good friends Tom and Ann, some of our favorite discussants on this topic, both hard-bitten pros where they focus on bottom lines and bankability, et cetera. So I think I think it's going to be very
Yeah.
important to bring all these threads together. In fact, I just mentioned, Alex, that as you said, I've been involved in innovation in various ways, and I would add to what you've said, the certainly the university engagement at MIT, what we've done at EFI over many years, et cetera. So I think the innovation discussion is one that really needs to bring in lots of perspectives while understanding that this project is focused on the federally funded programs. Now, look, clearly it's a not so held secret that the innovation agenda has been central to U.S. Strength, politically, militarily, economically, culturally. But it's also true that we are in a period of very substantial change,
Mm.
certainly in the context of the government, very explicitly on the innovation agenda, and a shift, what I would say is from the traditional focus really on earlier stage research and development to a much more enhanced focus on the downstream industrial policy, large scale demonstration, et cetera. But I think what's important is that all of these features did coexist. Emphasis is different. And I think right now we need to continue to emphasize across the entire innovation chain. We cannot sacrifice the early stage R&D, certainly, but I believe, frankly, we are in a different world in which, in the energy space, we are going to have to, let's face it, recognize the fact that we are, in a bipartisan way, already doing substantial industrial policy. So I think that's very important. Timescales have changed. For one thing, in the clean energy space, the failure to move as fast as many would like, certainly, in the energy transition, has added pressure to looking along the entire innovation chain. And secondly, look, the reality is that we don't get the only vote. That's often said in the context of war, but I would say it also in the context of market development. And so we see that China, for example, is leading the way very, very hard in terms of developing markets and service to those markets in clean energy. So I do think that in the United States, there's been a bit of a pivot, and of course, the Ukraine and Iran situations even add to that pivot, in some sense, back towards fossil energy and energy security issues. But the reality is, we need to address all the developing markets. That certainly includes the clean energy markets, and indeed, with the recognition that those clean energy markets development are an important part of energy security as well. So it's all an issue of innovation in the service of climate, energy security, and social equity, in, as we always emphasize, one conversation. One other point I just make, I'm sorry, and then I'll hand it over to my colleagues here, but is that I do think that it's been happening now for a few decades, but very important attention needs to be paid to the evolving university industry partnerships. Those have taken on a new dimension. And for those in the audience who know the famous Pasteur's Quadrant book, I think of the 1990s, it's really about, especially in the energy space, a
Yeah.
lot of very basic research that is motivated by problems that need to be solved. In contrast to, say, developing the atomic clock, which ends up being at the heart of the GPS system, for example. I mean, that's still very important, I think, to do, but so is this Pasteur's Quadrant work. And I think that's kind of a new relationship for the universities. It does not respect university departments. God did not organize the world according to basic science disciplines, for example. And and I think in energy we see that in spades. And I think this Pasteur's quadrant idea captures that even better. So let me turn it back to you, Alex. There's a lot more to say based upon a too long engagement in this issue.
No, I suspect, but I think you set up my next question for Tom quite well. It's this kind of dance of sorts between the private sector and the government and those, any policy support, and that sort of, pointing to you, Tom, as CEO, as former CEO of one, I would say the arguably the utility with arguably the largest innovation infrastructure Southern Company. How did you think about, where Southern Company directed its research? How did Southern Company think about this like chain of innovation? And, what does that public-private partnership look like? I always think about there's a tension between, do companies look at where the federal government is going and then sort of seek to be additive to that? Or how do companies look at what the government is doing and then the companies may want to fill gaps that the government isn't? If you have any thoughts on that, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, sure. Ernie touched on something. I'm going to start out with a principle, and that is energy security permits economic security, permits national security. I'm going to start with that as a premise and then move to the notion that there's really three kinds of companies in the world. There's moving prey, there's birds of prey, and there's roadkill. Companies that lose their ethics or otherwise become roadkill. Look at Enron. But when I distinguish between what is a bird of prey and what is moving prey, it really deals, I think, with your sense of how you define success over time frames. Companies that are moving prey typically chase the latest cause du jour, whereas the birds of prey are those that have a long-term view. They always prioritize long-term results and make the short-term work. And that's really how I view the relationship between successful companies and government. We, by our notion, have about a 20-year planning horizon at Southern. And what we always have to do is think about what is the right long-term answer and build in that vein. We certainly will be active in the political front, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to support our initiatives. And as you pointed out, those are sometimes significantly shifting sands, but that shouldn't change your long-term view. It should change perhaps your allocation of how you choose to spend your time or fund it yourself. When I think about my time, I was the longest serving CEO chair of Southern Company, about 14 years. I viewed the idea of innovation as both a what, a thing, and a how, kind of a cultural issue. And my view is it was so important for us to have the posture, going back to this very first principle I talked about, of we need to understand what we think is the right long-term answer and then invent that future. What can we do to influence the pathways, the options that may arise to create that future? And so that's the way I thought about it at Southern. What did we do practically? Well, I was chairman of EPRI. We were one of the largest funders of EPRI, the Electric Policy Research Institute. That's where Ernie and I met probably 100 years ago, Ernie.
I think it was only 90.
In addition to EPRI, which is kind of a research co-op for the industry, I love EPRI and I think it's useful and constructive. I've never felt that it was the answer, though. Because it has a really broad membership, in my opinion, it's not completely edgy like you want research and development to be. it is kind of a mainstream, if you will, research and development arm. Southern Company, therefore, filled in a lot of these edgy gaps. We are, I think, the only company still with, by far, the largest significant proprietary research and development arm in the industry. It's headquartered in Alabama, but we are by far the largest allocation of corporate research funds to move ideas along the pathway of what we think the energy requirements of the future may be. We are also by far the largest private partner with the Department of Energy for a variety of fronts. But it even goes beyond that. We started, along with a couple other companies, kind of a venture capital, energy impact partners, and now that thing has grown like crazy. So investing in some of these, not bench research, but startup ideas where we can actually start to create a garden of good ideas that may grow into something significant. And then finally, we made a pretty big bet. Ernie was on my board when I was at Southern. It was kind of small in size compared to the, say, $100 billion enterprise that Southern Company is. But we made an options bet, if you will. We bought a company called PowerSecure. And my theory was that our customers' requirements for energy in light of advancing technology is going to change. And our ability to meet those needs may change dramatically from the old model of large central station generation and long haul transmission. And in fact, aren't we seeing that now with the advent of the enormous appetite for energy that the AI data centers et al. Now have? So what we've tried to do is take a variety of bets that make sense in the long run. Now, if you just contrast, say, the Biden administration to the Trump administration, I would argue that both are effective in very different ways in advancing this kind of idea. And that is, I would say under Biden, you saw enormous benefits accorded to renewables, particularly wind, solar, but others. And now with the Trump administration, I think they have been very effective at understanding what is going to be required to stay in a premier spot for the race to deliver energy capacity to support AI, quantum computing, and all the deliverables of the future. And so therefore they have unleashed America's natural gas capabilities. I think they're moving to permit more pipeline infrastructure, which we badly need, more electric transmission infrastructure, which we badly need, and thinking about what is the right balance down the road. Of particular, and I'll stop talking after this, but of particular note right now is the so-called new renaissance. Gee whiz, we were I think the first wave of renaissance of new nuclear in America. We were the surviving company that built the only new nuclear facilities in America in a generation of Americans. Geez, I guess the Vogtle units were the first new units in now about 40 years. And it's running like a top. In order to meet America's energy future, we need more nuclear. And that may mean more large-scale nuclear, which I'm a particular fan of, but also kind of the niche ideas like SMRs and a variety of other things. And then in the future, perhaps things like fusion and other ideas. So look, my view is long run, we've got to make sure that we have long-term goals, that we structure our short-term actions, despite whatever administration is in play, in order to build a bridge to that better future.
I think very prescient, and you brought up a lot of themes that I think we're going to be returning to momentarily, including new nuclear. So I really appreciate that. And let's get the outside investor view here. I almost want to make a joke and say like let's get serious. Sort of, how are we balancing risk and returns from a fund perspective in the energy innovation context, and like how does this kind of all come together? You're muted, Ann. Sorry.
There we are. Let's try again. Ernie said bottom lines and bankability. And I think that's the starting point to think about finance. And also pose the question, why isn't the money flowing in the way that it needs to? I mean, Tom has just given us a terrific example at the corporate level of what can be done. But really, what we're looking at is the whole financial ecosystem of different investors, and say so many of them have pledges on transition finance, and yet we're finding that words are not followed by action. So balancing risk and return, this is the day job, the bread and butter of a pension fund like CalPERS, where I worked for many years. And I think the CalPERS example does illustrate what it is that finance can do, and maybe puts a spotlight on a bit of what's lacking at the moment on the financial side of this dialogue. So I think the first thing to remember about finance, it's the good news. First of all, there's plenty of it. We're not short of money. That is not our constraint. The second thing is that the vast bulk of finance that's available for investment is attached to long-term liabilities. Pension funds like CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York City, New York Common, Texas Teachers and beyond, but also the ordinary people saving for their retirement through 401ks and so forth. Now, that means the liabilities for finance are long-term. And Tom, exactly as you said, unless we can match up these time horizons, we're going to unravel. What we have got in our financial architecture at the moment, unfortunately, is two barriers to efficiency. One is information, and this is where this new website is really going to plug a gap that really matters to investors in understanding what's going on the public side of the table at federal level, first for the Department of Energy. This is really important. But the other thing that we're lacking are incentives. But stick for a moment with the information gap. I think at CalPERS, when I first joined, CalPERS was already involved in a very wide range of different activities that we'd now look at perhaps as sustainability work. We counted them up. There were 111, no less. So top marks for enthusiasm. But what was really important at CalPERS was moving to the step of saying, it's not enough just to wave a flag and say, hurrah, for a good idea. You actually have to reflect your understanding of this agenda on, say, energy transition. You've got to actually reflect that, number one, in your investment beliefs, which guide your overall investment process. And then you've got to stump up. You've actually got to put money on the table so that the market out there, the opportunities out there, know that you're looking for those opportunities. So at CalPERS, and all praise here to Peter Cashin, who built out what I think is an absolutely outstanding climate action plan for CalPERS. It's part of a 2030 5-year cycle, which is how we do this type of planning. Our liabilities are modeled in 30-year cycles, but this plan needs to be a 5-year plan because you've got to be able to trim and respond to new events. The critical thing here is it identifies the need to work with companies, exactly as Tom was saying, but also policymakers and regulators, likewise, and fund managers. They may not own the money in the system, but they control it, and they're guided by their fiduciary duty to make sure they're managing risk and return in the right way. So the critical thing here, I think, is that CalPERS said, okay, we make a commitment as an investor towards the net zero goal for emissions by 2050. This is important. Sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. If we're asking companies to go about this transition, then the investor community also needs to step up and do its part. That 2050 commitment to net zero then shows up in what is this cycle of 5-year planning towards that goal. It's important for the companies, for the policymakers to see what the commitment is, not just the direction of travel. And then at the heart of this is 100 billion commitment to climate solutions. And to the point you both made, Tom and Ernie, about the opportunities out there. CalPERS has already deployed 60 billion of those funds. And at the 2030 mark, no doubt there'll be a review and a consideration of what needs to be refreshed on that. It therefore really demonstrates that investors have the money, they have the liabilities which drive this long-term perspective, and also we are always seeking novel new sources of risk-adjusted return. And there are some inefficiencies in this transition market which actually allow investors to deploy capital and meet their liabilities. So really, we're all wrapped around with fiduciary duty to be prudent, to act with loyalty to the beneficiaries of these schemes. And I think the investors are starting to realize that they need to work in partnership with policymakers. It's not just a matter of talking to companies, but calling on investors to have multi-asset class commitments at scale that mean that both projects and policymakers know when we say, like the old tale about Willie Sutton in the dock in court as a bank robber, why do you rob banks? And the story goes, says, because that's where the money is. Yeah. So the money in this case is with the private sector, but we've got to start thinking about building these partnerships, these relationships. The foundation of that is trust. Trust relies upon information and mutual understanding. And at the moment, we've got a chasm between finance and the public policy side. It needs to come together in a blended finance solution for a lot of these different projects that need to be funded. But there's precious little experience and understanding, I think, on both sides of how to go about that. And again, this is where, the work, Annie, that the foundation has been doing is of really such benefit, I think, to both sides. Thanks, Alex.
No, you guys are making my job very easy. Back to Ernie.
Hey, Alex, can I jump in and say?
I was going to you anyway, so feel free.
Well, one footnote though. I don't know what your question is. So
yeah.
The footnote is that clearly we are discussing innovation in the context of technology innovation, and that's great. But I do want to emphasize that business model innovation is really, really critical, especially for bringing in some of the technologies like AI, robotics, space technologies, et cetera, that are not identified as energy specific, but just like atomic clocks way back when for GPS, I think clever business models will bring those technologies together in new ways for the energy sector. And frankly, I think the energy sector has been a little bit behind in the creative use of these technologies for serving new energy needs.
Hey, and let me add something else too, if I could just jump in. I think Anne was really interesting. When we think about the motivator for providing funding at a federal level or anywhere, really, I know an enormous motivation for an enormous number of people is the idea of net zero by 2050, things like that. But I swear to you that in order to keep up with China and others, I think the idea of investing in innovation in a very fast-moving way is a matter of national security. And I think this administration and every subsequent administration will understand that. So this is not something that is like, I just want to feel good about the environment. I think it is something that is required for the United States going forward.
Can I just, you're getting a right little, Alex, we're taking this conversation forward.
I just want to
with
listen
ourselves.
to the conversation.
But I just want to say, Tom, to your point about, is it virtue that's driving this concern with this target towards net zero? For some, yes, in civil society, NGOs, religious leaders, and so forth, yes, and I respect that. However, when you're a big pension fund or you're managing other people's money, your concern is with the repeatability of risk-adjusted returns, because your fiduciary duty extends out to the future, which is uncertain because it hasn't happened yet. And to your point, Tom, it's very much about us working out how to shape those future options in order to make sure investors are rewarded for those risks and that they're suitably mitigated. And you don't have to look very far to find those data that show you the risks to multiple sectors in a portfolio: insurance, fixed assets, the energy transition itself, and so on and so forth. And even it could be a constraint on emerging industries like AI, because, as you mentioned, the need for new energy to power artificial intelligence, which in turn is helping these other new technologies.
Sure.
Biomedical and so forth. So we have to take a systems approach to this, and we have to understand the risk and return duties of fiduciaries. You can't fool around with that, regardless of the political or electoral cycle. That is sacrosanct, and we need to use it to our advantage. Virtue is there for another day, but the economics are ultimately what will drive this for finance.
Well,
Sorry,
yeah, it's more than it's what is your motivation? What problem are you trying to solve?
Correct.
And my point was that the national security problem,
I agree with that completely,
is
in
a
new
requirement.
imperative.
It's not a virtue.
Yeah.
And one other point, when we talk about federal support, because I know this varies from administration to administration, I think we really need to focus on not tax policy, which to me is way more ephemeral than real funding allocation.
Yeah.
We need to focus on the latter, not the former.
Yeah.
Could I also add, since Anna and Tom both raised this zero carbon issue, that although we are, I think, focused here really on the United States, that the zero carbon issue raises the fact that we need to think about very, very different regional approaches in different parts of the world. And so our innovation has to be such that I think that, we build very strong domestic markets that provide the foundation for reaching out into other parts of the world, some of which may be at our level of economic development, and many of which are not.
Yeah, spot on, Ernie. So there are issues of security. There's, for me, the fiduciary, you need risk-adjusted returns. Just to put a number on it, at CalPERS, for every dollar paid in pension, over 50 cents comes from investment returns. That gives 2 million people in one single pension fund a complete alignment of interest with this agenda. But we've got competition from China for sure, but there is also the issue of Europe as a trading partner, and getting American companies to the level where they can navigate and compete effectively through the carbon border adjustment mechanism. We said markets run on two things: information and incentives. So it's making painful, difficult progress, but there are economic consequences on carbon emissions, not just for investors who are starting to price that externality in new ways because we're getting the data that enable us to do it, but also from regulators who are wanting to price what are seen as externalities. And that could end up meaning that companies that haven't got a good picture of their emissions and likewise complying with California's new rules. It's not, California, the fourth biggest economy, if it were its own nation state. These are significant developments in the global market, which is part threat, I think, an even bigger opportunity. And I fully agree with what Tom said. This is now undergirded by a recognition on energy security, which is, I think, going to add continuing momentum.
I thought California and Texas were their own nation states, but anyway.
Only if you're talking about barbecue. I think if you get to Texas, right? They claim that, and I'll give it them.
Let me cut through this fantastic discussion with an additional question for Ernie, building on what was just said. I really liked how Tom put it, from Southern's perspective, but I think it can be applied to some of the things Ann said as well. this is an innovation in energy, and oftentimes, the smart approach is pursue a garden of good ideas, I think is how Tom put it. How, from a policy perspective, Ernie, do we do that practically? Like, I think we've seen in recent years, maybe when an administration wants to do everything all at once, it's like a lot of people trying to fitting through one door. Is it as simple as tech neutral support? I know you mentioned industrial policy before. Kind of how do we get good at all these things? Or is there more of a systematic, maybe as Tom was suggesting, things that we might stack up as critical to a certain thing, a principle like national security? Do we stack it up, or how do we address it? Because I do agree with this notion of this garden of good ideas, but kind of how do we do that from a policy perspective?
Well, first of all, we have to, in the United States, in my view, get away from this roller coaster that we are on for a lot of different policies. And in the innovation agenda, I think that will end up being very debilitating. Now, I do think there is a differentiation there in the sense that I think let me call it the Bohr's quadrant, the basic R&D is less subject. It's not immune to, but it's less subject to the roller coaster than is the developing industrial policy, which tends to be inherently more controversial. And we are seeing, in fact, in the administration today, we've seen it in the last administrations, going back certainly to Obama, in terms of different ways of supporting deployment. But I think in this administration, we're seeing some, for the United States, radically new steps, certainly in the energy arena, like equity stakes in private companies, like profit sharing in private companies, like at least in one case, a golden share, kind of national champion companies. And I think in the policy world, we need to start focusing much more on what the ramifications of that is. I'm not arguing against it, by the way, but I am saying that I think we need to go into it with eyes as wide open as we can, because we can have a lot of collateral damage to competitiveness in the economy, for example, which I don't think has gotten sufficient attention, either in the government or in the the academic world, the policy world.
Yeah.
I think we're all just kind of stumbling along at the moment, to be perfectly honest. And I think we need to focus on this much, much more. I think also I mentioned the university government, university industry partnership, but I think in all of these discussions, it's not equally true everywhere. But the universities, the private sector companies, and the government need to find ways to, I think, more effectively work together across the innovation chain. One thing which I'll be honest, I do not rate highly, is the turn away from a step taken in the BIL, the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was frankly something that EFI had recommended back in the first Trump administration, namely the establishment of an Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, something that could do very, very large demonstration projects in a number of energy domains. And that program has been pretty much eliminated. I think it's a gap in our approach to the innovation spectrum. So bluntly, I'd like to see that, or something like it, restored beyond, let's say, the nuclear domain, which you mentioned earlier, which still does have a tailwind in terms of getting funding for large scale demonstration and deployment.
Hey, Ernie, in the past, you and I've chatted about the role of the national labs and rethinking that maybe. What are your current thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the national labs are being recognized as very important special repositories of knowledge and innovation. I think one is seeing that, including, I mean, I mentioned the demonstration projects, but I think the current administration is also looking to put even more emphasis on the labs providing a technical foundation that can serve the private sector and the universities. I'm not sure we have fully got the key in the lock, but we're fumbling around it, I would say, and I think that will be very important. As you know, going back to the Obama years when I was in the government, the we always felt that there was much more that the labs could be used for, including, by the way, not just in the innovation space as generally defined, but another thing was to try to work into the contracts how the labs could play much bigger role in regional economic development, especially in the energy space. I think there's a lot to do there, Tom, and I agree with what you implied.
Tom, I wanted to ask something similar to you from your sort of former, with your Southern Company hat on. These trends in what we'll call industrial policy, where it seems like the government is more pointed on the market development side. Is that something like that with this long-term view that you've been emphasizing, I think correctly, are those specific actions registering as one way or another, or something that is just about like, new tools being deployed and we'll see how they play out? Or do you have otherwise an opinion on kind of maybe what might be seen as in the United States a non-traditional approach, federal government playing more of a role on the market development side?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I think whether it is the administration or Congress has been very open to non-conventional models about how to attack this energy security / national security issue. I've testified in front of the Senate Intel Committee and worked with a variety of other people, and I know a lot of smart people are working on that right now. And let me just give you a dumb example. But so Ernie has been a leader in nuclear development. We've done the last nuclear plant in America, but we need to build so many more. And both Ernie and I are involved with this nuclear scaling initiative, which is a global initiative to try and push that along. In the United States, we have really two types of energy markets. One is integrated regulated, where within a single entity, you have generation, transmission, distribution, and sales. In about half the United States, and I am critical intentionally here, we have something called organized markets. I call them the so-called organized markets. I think they are badly flawed, and they don't support neither innovation nor do they support the investment of long-term assets. In those markets, it may be an unconventional idea for the United States to take an active position. And let me give you an example. Because the revenue models in all those markets are by their nature short-term, and going back to one of Ann's points, you got to balance. It's the old immunization problem, long-term assets with long-term liabilities. If you're going to build something like a nuclear plant, which by its definition is a long-term asset, how do we create in those short-term markets a long-term revenue source and some assurance of a balance in risk and return? The government may be the one to take a significant role, and perhaps other sovereign funds along with the government, to bridge the construction period, which by its nature is really long, let's say 8 to 10 years, and to give some revenue assurance for, say, 30 years as to the capacity value and energy value coming out of those markets, and make those independent of the so-called organized market structures that currently exist. And maybe there's the old BOT model, which I used to do internationally when I was the CFO of our international company, where the government's involved in building, gets ready to operate, transfers it over to a private sector company. Government doesn't do anything like that right now, lay aside models like TVA and Bonneville. But that may be an active role. And I'll tell you another one. And I guess we'll get to nuclear later. But we have a joined national interest in rebuilding the manufacturing capacity of the United States. When we built Vogtle, we got our large metal forgings out of Mongiarati in Italy and IHI in Japan. Didn't exist here. We got our large equipment, transformers, turbines, overseas, Doosan, et cetera. Skilled labor. People talk about, oh man, what's going to happen with AI jobs and everything else. We need skilled labor in terms of electricians and welders and pipe fitters. Darn good paying jobs that will persist, I think, for a long time, irrespective of what happens in the AI world. These are things where, in fact, government needs to come together with the private sector, everybody in the boat together, to come up with non-traditional solutions about how to solve these important supply chain problems. And I can tell you, it may create strange bedfellows, but I think it's something that absolutely needs to happen again in the national security interest.
Anything you want to jump on the nuclear scaling opportunities and challenges?
Was that for Ann?
No, Ernie, for you.
Oh, for me. Oh, I see. Well, yeah, look, I basically agree with Tom. I would just say that the interest for many of us in nuclear is, in fact, scaling. I mean, building one or two, I mean, I have no objection, but neither do I have any passion for it. We need to build order books, so-called. In other words, construct enough reactors of one technology. I don't mean only one order book. There could be several technologies, but each with its own order book, so that we can, the main point is we can benefit from learning down the cost curve, and we will have an enterprise large enough, this is following Tom's point, to merit investment in supply chains. Because you don't do that without a big enough order book. We're seeing that in some parts of the nuclear fuel business, for example. So that's one. And secondly is what's been already discussed, Tom and Ann, and that is risk management, which takes on many, many flavors. And I agree with what Tom said, I guess, that one way or another, the U.S. government has got to figure out its way to be a player in the risk management approach, along with the utilities and the regulators and the EPCs and the OEMs and the hyperscalers, the customers, et cetera. We need, as Tom said, a kind of creative solutions that involve risk management. But I still believe one of the shortcomings today is the failure for any of those risk management discussions to get across the finish line with regard to the government engagement.
It really is a brand new style of industrial policy.
Yeah.
It is a reimagination of the role of government in the development of these critical assets.
Yeah, I would just add that we've got to realize, certainly if we're going to deploy the money, we don't have the standardized data sets of sufficient quality to feel that risk is being managed, mitigated, rewarded. So, in finance, there's an understanding, it's called information asymmetry. When you don't have the full picture of risks, the price that you expect on returns goes up. It gets more expensive to raise capital without that disclosure. So, Akerlof, Janet Yellen's husband, at Berkeley wrote a paper called The Market for Lemons. So, Tom, in your garden of innovation, there's a market for lemons. We want this to become a market for peaches. But that means we've also got to pay attention to, I think, an enabling element in the role, in the federal and the state role, which is to make sure that we're focused on material financial reporting, which captures these risks and opportunities. And at the moment, there is not a clear direction of travel for the US. IFRS, which covers international financial reporting standards, has rolled out under its family of initiatives 2 standards, S1, S2, S2 specifically on climate risk. California's hitching a ride. The private equity industry is hitching a ride. ILPA has agreed a memorandum. So we're seeing, there's a danger here, I think, that the federal government approach may be outflanked by investors driving for investment-worthy data on these issues. And if we can solve for that, we're going to get the flows of money that will make sense and meet people's needs. So I think if we could sort of retreat a little from the rather emotional, pearl clutching about the idea of climate change and get into language around risk and return, energy transition, security, as you say, Tom, then proceed in sorting out our market for lemons, because the money won't flow without the information, or it will flow, but at a much higher price because people don't know what they're buying or what the opportunities even look like.
Let me expand on a couple of things you said too. When we get into this discussion of what can the federal government do in a reimagined industrial policy, 2 important issues that we don't talk about probably enough are the federal-state relationships. Ernie alluded to it also. But this idea about regional differences, somehow the states need to be party to this because typically we have state regulation and a variety of other things. We just can't cram down on the states what's going to happen in the United States. The second is international policy. I remember there was the book, shoot, I just forgot it, but The World is Flat. The world certainly isn't flat anymore. And that may have been true at one time or maybe as an aspiration, but it isn't today. And so the idea of industrial policy not being just domestic, but how do we work together with our international partners in order to build a financeable future? And then finally, I'll hit one more hot button, but it's the immigration issue. We're going to need workers, and we need to think about how we're going to reach across our border to bring more people to bear to get this problem solved.
Human capital, natural capital, and financial capital.
Yeah.
Back to the core investment beliefs from, CalPERS days. That's what drove us to understand. We have to understand profit, people, planet. Actually get a grip on the multifaceted nature of these forms of capital. But I completely agree with you, Tom. We need interoperability. If you're an engineer like you understand that. So if you're a poet, you might say it is our dream of a common language. But you can't have companies or projects doing business, of course, in California, with the rules coming in, not much at SEC level perhaps, but then wanting to trade or do business in Europe and compete for that European market or reporting under California. We can't start burdening companies or projects with masses of new reporting. That's not going to be good. We've got to have a global baseline, which is really on these critical matters of risk and opportunity. And without that, it's going to be patchy on the financial flows. One of the big global asset owners that we interviewed during a project at OMFIF to ask the question, where's the money? When will it show up? And at what price? And in time, maybe? We had 12 asset owners responsible for about 5 trillion. And one of them commented that even though all of them, 100%, all of them agreed public-private partnership is the only way forward, particularly through blended finance capital stacks to lay off risk, particularly. That's important. Not tax credits, as you said, Tom, completely agree. That was not of interest because it's subject to the whims and fancies of the political process. But these sorts of capital stack designs, they can be very effective. But we've got to get that piece sorted out, before we can actually go knocking on the door looking for public money. The partnership piece is a really important strategy going forwards, but it's got to be a common language. It's got to be something that doesn't burden companies with different reporting requirements. So with, what did it say? Think global, act local, which is good advice as always.
Yeah, and I'm gonna expand on one more point. The whole issue of human capital is so important. When I was working at Southern Company, I always found this side benefit of promoting innovation, the barbarians of our workforce, the people that will say why and why not. When you promote these kinds of ideas as a cultural aspect, it transforms the idea of hold on to what I've got, playing defense, to really playing offense. How can I create the future? And how can I get better every day? Isn't that also true for the workforce in America? I keep hearing this drumbeat of, oh man, AI is going to destroy jobs and really make my life worse for so many, a big segment of the population. If we can rethink this industrial policy to involve and allow big swaths of the workforce to play offense and be part of the answer for the future, that is great for the American culture.
Yeah, and it's no surprise the Paris Agreement, the first page and a half, is precisely on what you just said, Tom. We need what gets called a just transition. We've got to bring workers, communities, indigenous people, often the stewards of water and biodiversity resources. All of these different communities need to be attended to. Their interests need to be attended to, but the workforce, very, very important.
And with that, I really appreciate what essentially became a masterclass of energy innovation. I want to thank the panelists for spending so much time with us today, talking about U.S. energy innovation, mostly in the U.S. context, but I think it's really important how that bled over and talked about the interface in the global context with what's going on today and tomorrow. We're going to shift gears. Thank you, panelists, so much. And I'm going to introduce Sarah Frances Smith, Deputy Director of Innovation here at EFI Foundation, who will be showing us a few additional quick details about the Energy Innovation Project.
Thanks, Alex. And thanks, everyone, for the lively discussion. In a second, we'll show the launch video for the project. We made this video to capture the spirit of the Energy Innovation Project, which is everything that our panelists have just been discussing, i.e. the need to derive and provide real innovation metrics on, as Anne put it, America's energy needs, risks, and opportunities. In the project, we ask questions like, what's the value and the impact of a federal dollar? Or how much funding does the government have for any given technology? And like Tom said, what are the non-traditional tools available to invest that funding? This is the data the new tool offers. Our thinking on a basic level was, in order to maintain America's competitive edge, we have to first be able to measure it. So the database is live now, and we encourage you to go check it out and start exploring its various offerings. In the meantime, let's roll the video.
America has a long history of leading the world in energy innovation, from nuclear power in the 1950s to the shale revolution of the 2000s. In recent years, Congress provided the U.S. Department of Energy with significant funding to advance energy innovation. However, implementation has been slow, and in 2025, the U.S. abruptly reversed course, cutting billions of funding for development at companies and universities across all 50 states. Energy leadership means setting aside ideology and leaning into all energy markets. The Energy Innovation Project by the EFI Foundation and its partners delivers transparent data and unbiased analysis, as well as recommendations for new ways to accelerate progress. Analyzing innovation is challenging enough, yet the relevant data is often buried across hundreds of static government reports. The Energy Innovation Project is assembling these public data on how spending, people, and projects impact the pace and scale of innovation. America's innovation system is critical to our economic growth, national security, and global leadership. The Energy Innovation Project is developing the resources to support public and private efforts for long-lasting American energy leadership. Work with us to modernize American energy innovation. www.efifoundation.org/Energy Innovation Project.
I want to be sensitive to everybody's time, and we're -1 minute, so please reach out with any questions. If you have any data requests, or you're looking to partner with us on this journey to modernize American energy innovation. I want to thank again the panelists for your insights, and we look forward to seeing you all very soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
all.